It is 2:10 in the morning, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. 35,000 feet below, there is nothing but open water for 1,000 miles in every direction. In the cockpit of Air France Flight 447, First Officer Pierre-Cédric Bonin has just taken the controls. The autopilot has just disconnected, and something is telling him to pull the stick back. The French safety investigation published a finding that stays with you. For 54 consecutive seconds, the stall alarm screamed in that cockpit. An unmistakable, urgent, synthetic voice repeating one word. And for every one of those 54 seconds, the input on the side stick kept the nose up. The entire emergency, from first sensor failure to impact with the Atlantic, would last 4 minutes and 24 seconds. The sensor that failed that night was on a replacement list. The parts had already been ordered. The aircraft was scheduled to receive them upon its return from Rio de Janeiro. It never returned. In the next 13 minutes, you will know exactly why that sensor was still fitted to that aircraft, and who held the authority to change it. On the evening of May 31, 2009, 216 passengers boarded Air France Flight 447 at Galeão International Airport in Rio de Janeiro. The flight would take them across the Atlantic to Paris Charles de Gaulle, an 11-hour journey on one of the most reliable, wide-body jets in commercial service, an Airbus A330-203, registration FGZCP. They came from 33 countries, business travelers, families, vacationers. The youngest person on board was an infant, 7 months old. 3 pilots would fly the aircraft. Captain Marc Dubois had logged nearly 11,000 flight hours over a 3-decade career. At 58 years old, he was one of Air France's most experienced long-haul commanders. For the overnight crossing, he was scheduled to rest in the crew bunk, standard procedure, before returning to the cockpit for descent into Paris. His 2 first officers would hold the flight deck in his absence. David Robert, in the left seat, was 37 years old with 6,500 total flight hours. In the right seat, designated pilot flying for this segment, Pierre-Cédric Bonin, 32 years old, just under 3,000 flight hours. Flight 447 departed at 10:29 in the evening, local time. Cruise altitude, 35,000 feet. At 2:01 in the morning, Captain Dubois transferred command to his first officers and retired to the rest bunk. He had slept for approximately 1 hour before departure. Robert and Bonin flew on into the equatorial night. Ahead of them lay the Intertropical Convergence Zone, a band of towering equatorial storm systems that airline crews cross routinely, threading between the cells by radar. At 2:06, Bonin advised the cabin crew of expected turbulence and reduced airspeed slightly, a standard precaution. What neither man understood was what was about to happen to 3 small probes on the nose of their aircraft. An aircraft measures its own airspeed through pitot tubes, small forward-facing sensors that calculate velocity by reading air pressure differential. The Airbus A330 carries 3. All 3 on Flight 447 were the Thales Model AA, a probe type that Airbus had identified 2 years earlier as susceptible to temporary obstruction by ice crystals at cruise altitude. At 2:10:04 in the morning, all 3 probes iced over simultaneously. The consequences were immediate. With contradictory airspeed data coming from all 3 sources, the flight computers could not reconcile the readings. The autopilot disengaged. The autothrust cut out. Most critically, the aircraft shifted from what engineers call normal law, the mode in which the computers act as a guardian, preventing the crew from stalling the aircraft, to alternate law 2B. In alternate law 2B, those protections do not exist. Flight 447 was now a fully manual aircraft at 35,000 feet in the dark, over the Atlantic, at 2 in the morning. At 2:10:06, Bonin took the side stick. "I have the controls," he said. What he did next is documented in the official cockpit voice recorder transcript. He pulled the side stick back, nose up. The aircraft was not in a dive. It was flying straight and level, but the airspeed indicators were unreliable, the autopilot was gone, and in a moment of startle and confusion, Bonin's instinct was to climb. The aircraft responded. At 2:10:51, 47 seconds after the pitot tubes failed, Flight 447 had climbed nearly 3,000 additional feet to 38,000. Its true airspeed had fallen to approximately 52 knots. The aircraft entered a full aerodynamic stall. The stall warning activated. The synthetic voice, what crews call the cricket warning, filled the cockpit. Stall, stall, stall. Then it stopped. Not because the stall had cleared. The warning system had a design characteristic the BEA investigation would later identify as a critical flaw. At extreme angles of attack, the measured airspeed falls below the minimum threshold for the warning logic to trigger. The alarm went silent at the exact moment it was most needed. "Watch your speed! Watch your speed!" David Robert called across the cockpit. The aircraft was descending at nearly 10,000 feet per minute. But the attitude indicator showed the nose pointing upward. The instruments gave the crew a contradiction they could not resolve. The plane felt like it was climbing. It was falling. At 2:11:32, Bonin said, "I don't have control of the airplane anymore now." Robert briefly took the controls. He pushed forward, the correct recovery input. The stall warning reactivated. Then Bonin pulled back again. Both pilots were now inputting simultaneously through their side sticks. The system averaged the commands. Neither pilot knew the other was fighting him. Captain Dubois re-entered the cockpit at 2:11:40, summoned from the rest bunk by Robert. "What are you doing?" he asked. "We've lost control of the plane," Robert told him. "We don't understand at all. We've tried everything." Dubois understood within seconds that the aircraft was stalled. At 2:12:02, he said, "No, no, no! Don't climb!" But they were at 14,000 feet. They had fallen 21,000 feet in less than 2 minutes. At 2:14:23, with approximately 5 seconds remaining, David Roberts said, "Damn it, we're going to crash! This can't be happening!" At 2:14:28, Flight 447 struck the Atlantic Ocean at approximately 10,900 feet per minute, faster than a skydiver in terminal freefall. 4 minutes and 24 seconds. 228 people were aboard Flight 447, 216 passengers, 12 crew members. Every one of them perished. For 5 days, search aircraft from Brazil, France, and the United States covered more than 3,000 kilometers of open ocean. They found debris. They found 104 of the passengers and crew. They did not find what they needed most, the black boxes that would explain what had happened in that cockpit. The flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder lay at the bottom of the Atlantic under nearly 4,000 meters of water. Deeper than the Eiffel Tower stands tall, 4 times over, beyond the reach of the technology deployed in those first days. For 22 months, the cause was unknown. 4 deep-sea expeditions were mounted. 3 failed. In April 2011, the 4th mission, deploying REMUS 6,000 autonomous underwater vehicles capable of mapping terrain at extreme depth, located the main wreckage field. The recorders were recovered in May 2011. They were undamaged. The data they contained was precise. The timeline it produced was complete, and it gave the world a finding that every commercial aviation authority immediately acted on. For 54 seconds, the stall warning was active and audible in that cockpit. For 54 seconds, the inputs on the side stick kept the nose of the aircraft pointed upward. A forward push of a few centimeters, at any point in those 54 seconds, would have recovered the aircraft. The Airbus A330 was entirely airworthy. Its engines were producing full thrust. 228 people were aboard a flyable aircraft. They did not make it home. The Bureau d'Enquête et d'Analyse, France's aviation safety authority, published its final report on July 5, 2012. 224 pages, 25 formal safety recommendations. What it found was not ambiguous. In 2007, Airbus had identified that the Thales model AA pitot tubes fitted to the A330 and A340 fleet were susceptible to temporary obstruction by ice crystals at cruise altitude. Airbus issued an advisory recommending replacement. It was not mandatory. Between May 2008 and March 2009, Air France logged 9 separate incidents of unreliable airspeed readings on its long-haul fleet. Every incident was attributed to pitot tube icing. All were reported internally. On May 29, 2009, 2 days before Flight 447 departed Rio, Air France convened an internal meeting to accelerate the replacement program. The registration FGZCP was added to the schedule. It would receive the new probes upon returning from Brazil. It did not return. 2 months after the crash, in August 2009, the European Aviation Safety Agency issued a mandatory airworthiness directive requiring the immediate replacement of all Thales AA probes on A330 and A340 aircraft worldwide. Not a recommendation, a directive, backed by enforcement authority. The directive Airbus had issued in 2007 could have been worded the same way. What changed after Air France 447? In 2014, the International Civil Aviation Organization amended its global pilot training standards to require what the industry now calls upset prevention and recovery training, UPRT, high-altitude stall recognition, manual flight after automation failure, startle response under pressure. The final report on Flight 447 is cited by name in the regulatory preamble. By 2016, the European Aviation Safety Agency had made UPRT mandatory for every airline pilot's initial type rating training in Europe. By 2019, the United States Federal Aviation Administration had followed, amending 14 CFR Part 121 to require stall recovery scenarios in every U.S. air carrier's training program. The BEA also recommended that angle of attack data be displayed directly to pilots, so crews can see a stall state directly, not wait for a synthesized warning that can fall silent at extreme conditions. That recommendation has been adopted. The stall warning logic that silenced itself at the worst moment has been redesigned. Every commercial pilot in the developed world now trains in a simulator for the scenario that ended Flight 447. 228 people did not come home from that flight. Their names are on a memorial in the Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris. The youngest among them was 7 months old. The aircraft was airworthy. The crew was trained. The alarm was sounding. The BEA's finding does not assign blame. It documents. It states, in plain language, that for 54 seconds, a stall warning was active and the correct recovery input was not made. It states that the training for that precise scenario did not exist. It states that the sensor failure that began the cascade had been documented, reported, and scheduled for correction, and that the correction did not arrive in time. What the BEA report cannot change is this. The document that would have mandated immediate pitot tube replacement, had it been written as a directive rather than a recommendation in 2007, was within the authority of people who chose otherwise. That choice and its consequences are recorded in the official record of French Aviation Safety Investigation BEA 2009-0429-IF. 228 names on the same memorial tell you the rest. If you want to understand how a manufacturer's known engineering defect was documented, buried, and ultimately blamed on the pilots, the story of the DC-10 crash over Chicago in 1979 is linked above. 273 people. A pylon failure that investigators had already documented. Every week, the Disaster Archive uncovers the catastrophes that change the rules. Subscribe to stay with us.